30 seconds. Thank you. 30 seconds to respond. And then we're going to close with 3-minute conclusions from each of the candidates. So, couple of rules. Number one rule is respect. I expect respect amongst the candidates. From everything I've heard, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I expect respect from the audience. We're here to hear from each of these candidates. They've all got things to say. I don't want anyone interrupting the candidates. I understand there's a lot of passionate issues being discussed here, and many of these things are very near and dear to our hearts. But we want to hear from all the candidates, hear what everyone has to say. Okay, if a candidate gets interrupted, I'm going to extend that candidate's time. So it's not like you're going to be drowning them out or anything. I'm still going to give them time to answer. So a couple of other things with the questions. So I already mentioned the questions need to be written so that they can be answered by all the candidates. Any rude, intolerant, inciting hate speech, those won't be asked. Our two volunteers over here are going to be reviewing the questions and making sure that they meet those criteria. And then they're going to be passing me questions to make sure that we're covering a range of issues. Now, we're going to have time in total for about 10 to 15 questions, which means that there's a pretty good chance that your question is not going to be asked. But hopefully, somebody else's question covers the same subject. Okay, and I think that is it. So I'm going to pass things off to the candidates now. I think I've talked too much. And first up will be Anita Van Vel.
Good evening. Okay, let's try that. That works a lot better. Thank you. So it is so wonderful to see so many people here this evening, and I see a lot of familiar faces. A lot of you who've come over the last 4 years to either my weekly coffee hours and asked questions, and a lot of you also who've come to my drop-in hours at my office. So it's wonderful to have the opportunity to be before you here again. And as many of you know, over the last 4 years as your federal representative, I have been working collaboratively with community groups, with different groups in the riding, but also collaboratively across parties in Parliament so that we can get results right here for Ottawa-West Nepean. Now, whether that was working with the Wildlife Centre and environmental groups and community associations to be able to restore the wetlands on the DND campus to the point where this spring 190 species returned to those wetlands, and we've now got funding for a feasibility study to have a wildlife underpass underneath Moody Drive. Or working with the Lincoln Heights Community Association to bring the head of the NCC to your AGM to answer questions about the slashing of the trees that happened at Mud Lake. Or working with my NCR colleagues in the National Capital Caucus to make sure that the National Capital Commission had the funding that it needed, $55 million, for the critical infrastructure, which is now being used to help to restore and heighten the Belltown berm, the bike path around Belltown for floods. Or working with Karen McCrimmon in Canada and also with DND and Infrastructure Canada to make sure that we got an additional, after the $1 billion that we put into LRT Phase 2, we got an additional $100 million to make sure that that LRT was supposed to end at Bayshore, and we got it to end at Moody Drive. So these are the kinds of things I've been working on here in the community. In Parliament, I've also been working collaboratively. All too often in politics, an idea is shot down just because it comes from another party. And I have never done that. When a good idea came from the NDP on pay equity, I supported it. I became the chair of the committee. I made sure we got a consensus report, and in fact, every committee that I have chaired has always gotten a consensus report, and that allowed us to get the legislation through so that today, for the first time, the federal government has pay equity legislation that recognizes equal pay as a human right that can't be bargained away. I've also was chair of the Liberal Women's Caucus. And the first thing I did, I reached out to the women from other parties. We established an all-party women's caucus. And we worked on issues that aren't particularly partisan. For instance, we were able to get, by working together, $10 million extra in research for ovarian cancer. I have helped to form an all-party democracy caucus, which is vice-chaired by Elizabeth May, and there's 26 members from all parties working on how to make Parliament less adversarial and make it so that individual members have more say. And I'm looking forward to continuing to do that, to make Parliament work for you, to get results for our riding, and to keep being here every single week, listening to you and bringing your ideas to Parliament. Thank you.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. This evening started really well with a little bit of music. My name is Abdul Abdi, and I'm very, very happy to be here. First of all, thank you very much to the organizers for putting this wonderful event together. Much appreciated. Thank you to the audience members for taking the time. We know there's a national debate going on, but you chose ours. So we do appreciate that. So some of you may or may not know me. My name is Abdul Abdi. I'm the Conservative candidate. And professionally, my professional background is in policing. I've been a police officer in this neighborhood for the last 15 plus years. I've patrolled these neighborhoods. I'm very familiar with this community. And further to that, I used to be a youth worker right here at the Boys and Girls Club of Des Moines, where I worked 8 years with young people, helping them up with some of the needs that they had in their community. I've also been a volunteer in my community through the United Way Ottawa. I volunteered there. In fact, I was sitting on the board of directors for the last 5 years, and I've been involved with them back since the mid-90s. That's how much I care about my community. I'm a father. I have 3 children. And there's a reason why I'm running, because I believe I've given you guys many, many years in this community, and I believe it's time for me to serve your community and take it to the next level. One of the reasons why I'm doing this is because I believe for the last 4 years, for example, we did not have a responsible government and we did not have a strong representation. So I believe I can fill that void of leadership that is missing. One of the things that you're going to expect about me if I become a member of Parliament is I will be active. I will be engaged. I will be listening to you, your concerns, and your community. I've not been working at the Boys and Girls Club, I would say, for the last 16 years, but I sometimes take my lunches so that I can connect with the kids. I will never be absent from our community. I will ensure that I also look at our businesses, ensure that you're not considered or called tax cheats. I want to make sure we lower your taxes, and I want to make sure that we respect for the work that you do in our community. I will also work with my counterparts, provincially, municipally, to make sure we get things done in this riding. I work in a collaborative manner, and I can bring that kind of leadership to Ottawa-West Nepean. I will also be taking a lead in our government if I get elected for the area of safety and security. Andrew Scheer has committed to ensure that we bring a gang prevention program, and I'm going to make sure that I take the lead for that. I'm a father of 3 kids. I care about our future. I care about this community, and if I become a member of Parliament, I will make sure that I give you the best possible service you've ever had. So my name is Abdul Abdi. I look forward to having a good chat tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Angela McEwen, and I'm your new Democratic candidate here in Ottawa-West Nepean. I'm an economist at the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE. I've been an economist for the past 12 years. I've advised governments across Canada. I've worked on issues like climate change and a just transition, which is where we make sure that there are jobs for workers as the oil sands kind of winds down, we make sure that we're making investments in new jobs for workers in the new economy. I've worked on international trade deals like NAFTA and CETA, and I've worked on public pensions like expanding the Canadian pension plan. Before I was an economist, I spent 14 years in the Naval Reserves. I worked on both coasts, and I got to see a lot of communities, small communities up and down both coasts, and that was an excellent opportunity. I learned a lot in serving Canada in that way. Before I joined the Navy, I grew up on a small farm in rural Saskatchewan. I grew up in the same farmhouse that my grandfather grew up in, on a farm about 15 minutes from a town of 600 people. So there might be like as many people in this room as was in my hometown growing up. And that taught me values of community, that we're all better off when we pitch in and take care of each other. And so I think of these three kind of areas of my life have really led me to this point where I'm a mom, and my daughter looks at me when she reads a report about the IPCC that we've got 12 years to reverse global warming. And she's like, how is that even fair? I don't even get a chance. And so when she looks at me and says, what are you doing to make sure there's a future for me? I can't say nothing. So I knew that I had to step up and I had to take action. And I'm really proud of the NDP's plan on this front because as a labor economist who's worked on issues of just transition, I know that we can't just address climate change, we have to also address inequality, and we have to address the labor market. And that's what our plan does. We tax the rich a little bit more. We take back some of those taxes that we've cut over the past 30 years, and we invest that in the services that matter to you, like public transit, like retrofitting your houses, like education and healthcare. And we create jobs for Canadians in building electric buses, in retrofitting houses, and in providing the services that we need. So I'm really excited to put this vision before you tonight, this positive, comprehensive vision to change the status quo, because we know that it's not working for most of us, and we know that we need to make different choices to build a better economy that works for everyone. Thank you.
Check, check. Hello? Yep. My name is David Stibbe. Many of you have seen me wandering through the streets with my River Guide gear on as I own a small business here in our community, Ottawa City Rafting. So if you didn't recognize me before, maybe now you're putting some pieces together. This is my neighborhood. I have two daughters. We live up the street on House Street. I recognize a number of faces here. And that is why tonight is the most nervous I've been, because I prefer to be anonymous. My intention and why I'm here, I'm a full-time teacher, and I've been a river guide, I've been an adventure guide across Canada in many different areas, and I have a passion for our environment. And as a teacher, I would always talk to my students about, the natural environment, and we always discuss climate change as being a big issue. And lately, I've really come to understand that, this is the issue of our generation. And I have kids, and there are people that I talk to, the younger generation seems to, the clarity about this is just right in their faces. They know that this is an issue that actually is a crisis. It needs to be solved now. Students actually have anxiety. My own students used to call my environmental science class environmental depression class. Get that, right? I feel that it's the adults in the room that with all the noise in our lives, our day-to-day being, that don't realize how important this is. And so when I started to look, when I wanted to be politically active, I wanted to sort of represent to them something important, that I would actually put myself forward and do something about this. I looked at actually all the parties. And it was funny, when I actually read the Green Party platform, not only was I fully impressed, and it should be obvious, with their platform about climate change, but it was a very balanced platform. There is stuff about the economy, housing, pharmacare, all the big issues that we talk about. And even more important, when I looked at the leadership of that party, I looked at Elizabeth May, and I am impressed with this woman. She has stuck to her guns. She has taken the Green Party from the fringes into the mainstream. And I actually honestly believe the Green Party is what the Liberal Party thinks they are, right? They are actually progressive. We have credibility with our programs. We cost everything out. And aside from the Conservative Party, who hasn't actually costed their budget, we've actually fully costed our platform, and we are trying to balance the budget in 5 years. So these people that just look at us as only being an environmental program, I want to assure you we're not. So I am here to represent our riding, and my passion is local issues. I really want to focus on what we do here at our community, and I can tell you, I am a community person. I have kids in the schools here. I am out here every day. I opened a business for our community. Trust me, it doesn't make any money, but I want to be here for us.
Okay, thanks everyone. So on to the question section. So we got 3 questions coming up one from each of the 3 community associations. This first question comes from the Belltown Community Association, and we'll be starting with yourself, Anita, answering this one. The Sir John A. McDonald Parkway is a major commuter route for our community to Tunney's Pasture and the downtown. It's also a major commuter route for folks in Gatineau going to Canada High-Tech Industries. Yet the NCC has proposed narrowing this route to 1 lane in each direction. What is your position on this?
That is not going to happen. And actually, this is where the coffee hours have been very useful, because the first time I heard about this was actually when someone came to Tim Hortons to tell me about this. I actually spoke to the head of the NCC, and they told me this came out of something that was a proposal that was done as many things that could happen over the next 10 years. It was not something, it came from actually one of their public consultations, and I was very, very strong that this is not something, in fact, I called it a harebrained idea, and I have a commitment that this will not happen, at least if it's going to happen in the next 10 years, and it would be a feasibility study where they'd count the cars, and the assumption is that the LRT is going to take cars off the road, and I can absolutely assure you I was fighting against this when it first was proposed. I will continue fighting against this, because we know that, first of all, if you start to narrow those lanes, not only is that going to impact traffic, but that's also going to impact the accidents on that road if you've ever driven it in the rain. And I've also spoken to the mayor, and the mayor is absolutely 100% on board with this, because it would divert traffic onto the city streets. So in short, not going to happen.
Yeah, so everyone's going to be answering the same question. 1.5 minutes each.
So thank you very much. Again, a very good question. Look, my commitment to you is when it comes to transit, we want to make sure that people vehicles can flow through the traffic. And so obviously, if we have to narrow the streets, there's going to be an issue whereby obviously people are not going to get to where they need to go in a timely manner. We don't want to have any congestion. But let me tell you something you're going to get from me, folks. I do not want to be confrontational. NCC, whether we like it or not, they're a partner in what they do. They have a mandate. They have a responsibility. What we can do is we can share our concerns with them, explain to them the issue that this is going to impact in terms of commuters and our community. And I think that's probably the best route to take, is to be able to explain to them this is the problem, and as a result of this, this is what it's going to create. So I want to be the kind of MP who's going to be more reasonable, rational, and who's able to collaborate with different partners. For us to point a finger in the NCC and say that no way or the highway, it doesn't work. However, what we're going to do is we're going to share our concerns with them, work with all affected partners, and ensure we get the best possible solution for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. We are undergoing a lot of changes in Ottawa-West Nepean in terms of transit and the LRT, and there's a lot of infrastructure that is changing and that needs to change. And so I would agree with Mr. Abdi here that what you need is to have an ongoing relationship with the NCC so that you don't just hear about this at coffee hour. You've actually are having regular meetings with the NCC and know what their plans are around transit and around the traffic, because this is a really important issue that's going to affect a lot of people's lives, and it's going to affect our attempts to reduce congestion, to reduce carbon in the air that affects our health when there's congestion, and to make people's lives a little bit easier to get around. So I think that collaborative approach, keeping those lines of communication open with city councilors, with the NCC, is really important as we move forward in making sure that we can get around this community quite easily. Thank you.
Short term, we just want our public transit system to start working. When that happens, maybe we can think about what we're going to do with that parkway. The NCC has made it clear that they have a pretty ambitious plan for the parkway. Especially our side of the parkway. It's going to be integrated into a larger park, which they're actually looking to name. There's plans online that I've looked at intimately, and currently from what I have seen from their actual plans, that is not to consolidate into 2 lanes, is to actually take the 4 lanes and compress them all together so they're side by side. As a person who has basically a background in urban planning, I'm not a huge fan of the side by side, but what I do appreciate is it will enhance the green space next to the river, which I think is something that is vital, because it'll take away the salt from going into the river and all those nasty environmental consequences. And if they do eventually integrate it into a beautiful park, it is only going to be beneficial to us. I have a love-hate relationship with the NCC. Some things they do I love. Some things they do drive me crazy, like when they clear-cut Mud Lake. I was the one that actually brought it to most people's attention through a Facebook page. But it is something, they are people we have to work with. They have independence within our federal system, and everything has to be negotiated with them, as Mayor Watson can tell you with when they insisted that our LRT was not going to go above ground there, which on that side of the NCC's policy, I was fully supportive of it going underground.
Okay, next question comes from Lincoln Heights-Parkway Community Association. Our community, it's also an NCC question. Our community is unique in that the NCC controls a lot of land here, such as the MUP, Mud Lake, Sir Johnny McDonald, and the land near LRT station. This can create tension between municipal and federal visions for land use and maintenance. How do you propose to manage this tension and represent the needs of the community?
Rewind my last one. Really, it is, again, it's going to come back to the same thing. Look, we live in a unique city. It's the nation's capital. We have different partners here. I worked in policing. We went from just local police to provincial police to federal RCMP. We're all working in this together. The NCC is not going to be any different. And yes, I know we share several files with the NCC locally that we need to be collaborative with. So again, we want to put our interests first. We want to put your interests first. And what we're going to do, in my capacity as a member of parliament, is to be able to take all these concerns that are brought forward by our community here in Ottawa-West Nepean, have a very serious conversation with NCC, and while doing so, making sure that we put our interest as a community first. So, again, the NCC is one of those elephants in the room. You have to deal with them. The fact of the matter is we cannot ignore them unless there's going to be a systemic change in the structure that we have right now. They do have a mandate. And our job, my job as a member of parliament, is to bring a reasonable voice, a collaborative voice, and make sure that we put our interest, your interest first as members of Ottawa-West Nepean. And if I do get elected, that is the kind of collaborative effort that I can bring forward for you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that this is a time of a great deal of change with the NCC lands because of the changes that's coming with the LRT and public transit. And with that change comes the opportunity for some positive developments. So I've talked to people in the community about possibly, there isn't really a rec center for families on this side of the highway. And so there might be a possibility with some land, with either where Lincoln Fields is, that there could be not-for-profit uses, or that there could be, well, we need to make sure that we protect the green space that's there, and and make creative uses of where sometimes where the buses had gone, but they're not going there anymore. So we can transit some of the places where the bus parks were. Anyway, my point is that this is an opportunity to have these discussions about building what kind of community that we want, and to bring everybody together and talk frankly about what our priorities are and how we build the type of community that we want to have in the future. Thank you.
We're going to go back to my love-hate relationship here with the NCC. I honestly believe that they do an essential service, and they have been a blessing in our great city. They have preserved the green space next to the rivers. They have kept us probably one of the greenest cities in North America. But my fear is that they have suddenly had a sort of bent and are leaning towards commercialization and making money off the land. And that is what I would do. I fundamentally believe we need to preserve this green space. Having green space that is used for recreation is great, but having green space that is used for business is wrong. And that is something that I want to protect. I do believe that there are certain businesses, like a rafting company, that can work in the green space, obviously, because it is recreation and it is tourism, and those lovely little cafes they put on the river is great. But what I don't want to ever see is anything sold off to developers building housing on these pieces. We can find that space in our communities, and that, I think, is where we should be holding the NCC accountable.
One of the issues that we face with the NCC is the fact that the board of the NCC, it has an independent board, but most of the people on that board are not from the Ottawa-Gatineau area. The first thing that we did after we were elected is we gave an ex officio spot for the mayors of Ottawa and Gatineau so that they can sit on the NCC board, so that they're not surprised by a decision that comes from the NCC that the cities had absolutely no impact and no awareness of. That's the first thing we did. We also have a say over the NCC's mandate. And the first thing that Melanie Joly, when she became the minister who was responsible for the NCC, said that in their mandate, because it's a Crown corporation, there's no culture of consultation. It's kind of like you take this empty board and you make a lot of plans and you don't realize there's actually people living there. In fact, the NCC does a lot of things that normally a municipal government would do, but without the accountability back. And so we mandated the NCC to do public consultation, to bring in the communities. I feel very strongly that it's the members of the communities who understand best the green spaces, the protected spaces. They need to be involved. They need to be consulted. The culture hasn't shifted yet. I am making sure that the NCC is going to, and by the way, it's not, I think we have to be very careful about recreational use in conservation areas. We know that the members of this community will do the most to protect these areas, and we need to make sure you are involved in the decisions, and we've mandated the NCC to do that. I am going to be here to make sure that they live up to that mandate and include you in their decision making. Thank you.
Okay, moving off of NCC for a moment. This question is from Britannia Village. So over the last 15 years or so, the community built some flood protection works along the water. Most of you are probably familiar with it. That was paid for with a combination of provincial, city, and residential money, or property owners' payments. We know, however, we know that best case, we're likely to see 1.5 degree temperature rise globally. So we're likely to see more and more events like we saw last year. Thankfully, this investment worked for us, but there's going to be many more across the country, more floods, more tornadoes, more hurricanes, more droughts, more whatever. Can you point to a plank in your platform that is for accommodation of these events that are going to happen? Can you relate that back to, would it have paid for an infrastructure work like the Britannia floodworks? We're going to start with Angela with this one.
Thank you. Yeah, so I was among those of you who were helping to sandbag along the river this spring. And it was quite a scary proposition, I'm sure, for homeowners who were there. And this is the second time in 3 years that they've faced this. And fortunately, the berm did mostly hold, and it turns out that was a very prescient move on the part of the community to put that in place and to protect your community that way. And so it certainly paid off. And I think that what the NDP has promised to do is actually to double the current fund for working with communities to both help recover after a flood or a tornado event like that, and to put in place protection measures for communities where that's going to happen. So yes, absolutely, that's something that we're committed to, and to working with municipalities to make sure that protection is in place.
The Green Party is absolutely all in both climate mitigation and climate preparedness, as well as ensuring that we move to a future where we can sort of reduce our impact on climate change. If we are in a position of influence, which requires that all of you vote me in here, we have the plans to enforce that we bring a green infrastructure fund to actually help people address the challenges that are going to be happening in their neighborhoods. I have personally sandbagged with my students, myself, with my family here for the past 2 years, and I will tell you this is the new reality. And one of the issues that I have with this is, are we all going to be sandbagging every year, right? So the other piece of this puzzle is we need this to become part of our service structure. So the Green Party is looking at building a cross-platform environmental service corps that would include our protective services, our armed forces, to actually be the lead on these projects as opposed to the communities. Because I can tell you, if this is something we have to do every year, this is going to be a very stressful process for people, because this is what we're going to be taking weeks off work to deal with. And these things are not going away. So we have to both protect our resources, as well as have somebody to address these issues when they actually come into play.
So our government has already created a $2 billion disaster mitigation adaptation fund. Our platform proposes to increase this by $1 billion. We're also going to be putting $1 billion into nature-based solutions. As I mentioned before, the wetlands that we were able to get restored behind the D&D campus, they were able this spring to absorb a lot of the water that otherwise would have ended up in the communities. And these are the kinds of solutions that are very long-term. The other thing that we're doing is for those people, including myself, who took time away to try to sandbag, and those of us like me, I live in Belltown, to sandbag and try to save their homes. If you have to take time off work, or if you're affected by this, we're creating an employment insurance disaster fund so that you can actually be paid for the time off work. And also for those of us who live in areas where it does tend to flood, we will be creating, because insurance companies often won't insure you if you've had previous floods, a low-interest national insurance program so that we can actually insure our houses. We've also been working with Climate Canada to make sure we're mapping, and you saw some of the interactive maps this time, that we're actually mapping where the floods are most likely to be, so that when people are looking at their homes, they know exactly where they should be building and not building. And we're going to find science-based solutions to this. We're working with communities. You'll recall that the Canadian Armed Forces were here right away, making sure we protected the water filtration plant and protected Grandview Avenue. And we want to make sure that, and to answer the question specifically, yes, that adaptation fund could be used for the Belltown, or for the Britannia berm. Thank you.
Hello there, and thanks for that question. Before I continue with that question, I want to recognize some of the young people here tonight. Look, it's not about adults. There's young people here who care about their community. So kudos to you. I see there's many of them around this room. Second thing, I want to also recognize the Canadian Armed Forces who came out to help out to ensure that those sandbags were filled. Reality is, folks, we want to make sure that we help out anybody who's affected by these types of situations, disasters. We are there to help them out. It is, you know, if I become a member of parliament, it is a natural fit for me to look out for what's in the best interest of my residents. So those people who are going to be affected, I'm going to be the first person who's going to be fighting with the provincial governments or any other government in this case, whether it's municipal or otherwise, insurance companies, it doesn't matter who it is, to ensure that they get the help and support that they need. But it's also very, very important for those homeowners around those areas where they're going to be affected most to even have their own networks in terms of support, to be able to know about the trends in terms of the climate, the weather, and to work together themselves. But I will be there for you as a member of parliament, and that's why we have a $3,800 home renovation, green home renovation tax credit that will in fact help in situations like that, where if something like this happens, you can use those funds to be able to put your home back in order. It may not be a lot, but I'm telling you that's something in our platform, and the question was if we had something, and I just wanted to point that out. Having said that, I'm here to represent you, and I want to make sure we put your interests first. Thank you.
Okay, on to our first audience question. And I'm going to ask two questions because they're very similar. First part is, will you consider electoral reform? And the second question, if your party is elected, will they revisit the proportional representation issue? So we're going to start with Mr. Stibbe.
This is my biggest priority as a candidate, and I think it is the most important change that we can make in our society today. I honestly feel that the negativity that we have in politics and in our culture and all the trickle-down effect, which actually works when you're talking about culture, is impacted by our electoral system. First past the post, which is what we have today, encourages the winner takes all mentality, and it actually encourages us to actually bash our opponents. This is not healthy, because as leaders of the country do this, our children, even our adults, imitate our leaders, and that is where I think the root cause of this negativity in our society is. Electoral reform, in terms of two different things, ranked ballots first is very important, because if second place is worth almost as much as first place, do you think that we're going to be encouraging that negative discourse in our society? No, that will remove that. The other piece is that I really believe that many people do not vote anymore because they don't feel that they get anything out of their vote, because if they're going to vote for the Green Party or some of the smaller parties, they know that that vote isn't going to count. And we need to make those votes count so that people are actually engaged in our political system again. The Green Party, Elizabeth May, every candidate that I've spoke to, that is our priority, is to change the electoral system so that it is more functional and that we have a better system, because we all know that minority governments are actually more accountable than majority governments. Thank you.
As many of you know, I have always been a proponent of electoral reform. I signed the Fair Vote Pledge last time, and in fact, my previous work before I became a member of Parliament was in democratic development. This is something I've been working on long before I was elected. I abstained in Parliament. I was one of only a handful that abstained, of Liberals that abstained on that vote. I couldn't vote in favor of it because it included a referendum. But what happened on electoral reform is it wasn't cynicism, it was partisanship on the part of all parties. The fact is, in Parliament, there are disincentives to work together for good policies. It's more important to make the other guy look bad. And when we gave up our majority on the committee, what happened was the incentive, rather than the opposition parties working with us on something that they knew that the government could support and vote for, the opposition parties got together, the Conservatives and the NDP, and put forward a proposal of pure proportional representation with a referendum. And we know that every time there's been a referendum on electoral reform, it is such a confusing issue, and there's a lot of misinformation, and it has never succeeded. So I believe now the way forward is it's chicken and egg. We need to change how Parliament functions so that the next time a good idea comes forward like electoral reform, we can actually get it passed. And that's when I sat down with Elizabeth May and others to create an all-party democracy caucus so that we can change how Parliament functions, so that we can pass these kind of policies. At this point, I do believe that if we can get this at the provincial level in a few provinces, people get used to it and they like it, I do believe that that's when we would be able to bring it back at the federal level. But I myself continue to be a proponent of electoral reform.
100% failure on the Liberal. they have to wear it. They promised electoral reform in 2015. They did not deliver. It is as simple as saying to you today, we are sorry we will not be able to deliver a promise we made. When it comes to electoral reform, I am all for anything that is going to get our communities engaged in politics. Folks, I'm standing before you because I want to get engaged. There are people who look like me who are not engaged. There are people who are from my background who are not interested. And the reason why I'm taking an unpaid leave of absence is so that I can get more people engaged in the political system. I gave kudos to these young kids because I'm proud of the fact that they're here to talk about, to listen to politics from adults. This is awesome, and I'm interested in that. The reality of it is, when it comes to electoral reform, we need to have substance behind it. So when a party says, let's do it, and they make that as an election issue, they should follow through. For me, however, anything that engages our community and our young people to get engaged in politics, including electoral reform, I'm 100% for it. At this point in time, as Conservative Party, we never promised that. We never made it an election issue because we don't want to tell you something that we cannot keep. Unfortunately, it was the contrary for the other party, which made that promise, and now they want to change, based on what I'm hearing, our parliament system in order to get there. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, the only reason that we don't have electoral reform is because Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party cynically realized once they had a majority government that it wasn't in their best interest to do any kind of electoral reform. If we had electoral reform today, you wouldn't be getting the lame platform from the Liberal Party that is, we're a little bit better than the Conservatives, so you have to vote for us. We need electoral reform, as everyone else has said, so that people get engaged in the process. I knock on doors everywhere in this community, and people who look like all of us say, I'm so discouraged. They promised so much, and they broke those promises, and how can I hold them to account? Because they didn't bring in electoral reform, because they didn't do so many other things that they promised to do. And people are now thinking, maybe the system's broken for good. But it's not, because David says the way we can get electoral reform is in a minority government. Minority governments have shown historically that we can get that cross-party consensus that we need because it's in the best interest of every person who's elected at that moment to do so. Jack Layton did not hold the balance of power in 2009, but he got Stephen Harper to put forward a huge and much-needed package in order to avert a recession, the worst recession in Canada. And that's what an NDP elected representative in this riding will do for you in the next minority parliament.
All right. Next question. Is Canada's support of poorer countries too much, too little, or just right? And I believe we're starting with, who had the, yeah, David was first last time, yeah, so, yeah.
Well, thank you to whoever put that question forward. As you know, that before I was in politics, I worked overseas with international development, with the United Nations Development Program, particularly on women. And I will always advocate that we put more money into international development. We have a $2 billion feminist international assistance program, and that's going to make sure our dollars go even further, because we know that when we include women and girls in a project, that project is more sustainable, it meets the local priorities, and it's able to do more even with less money. We have increased international development, and in our platform we will continue to increase it. We have also put in money for girls' education. We have led the world in the ELSI initiative, which puts women in peace building and peacekeeping. I sit on the International Development Committee, and I have worked on making sure that Canada's development money is going to be used in ways that are going to improve lives. And frankly, I think that any party that is looking at reducing international development is incredibly short-term, because if you don't have the Red Cross in the Congo when the Ebola outbreak happens, it will affect us. When you have wars, when you cut conflict prevention, that is going to impact us. So will the refugees if you don't deal with poverty reduction. I worked with the Foreign Affairs Committee to create, and it's in our platform, a Center for Peace, Order, and Good Governance that will allow Canada to bring our expertise in democracy and in governance around the world, and to be able to make sure that we are leading the world when it comes to democracy and governance, and making sure that we are helping every country to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
I'll be the last person to tell you not to help those people who need our help around the world. And I know I came from a country in Somalia where I know they need help as we speak right now. So I'll be the last person to tell you that. But here's the reality. All politics is local. If we're not going to take care of ourselves here at home, we cannot be good to anybody. Tell me how you feel about a Canadian Armed Forces personnel who served our country and now has lost limbs and is now in Rideau Centre begging, asking for food. This is a shame. What Andrew Scheer has made a decision on is to ensure that we cut $1.5 billion on foreign aid. And folks, we're talking about countries that are already doing well, such as Argentina. We're not punishing those poor countries that need our help. We're still going to be committing over $700 million to assist countries that need help. Don't get caught up with this idea that people think that Canada is leaving people behind. We are not doing that. Again, I'll go back. In 2015, when the Liberals came to power, what's the first thing they said? Canada is back. Guess what? We never left. We were still a very good country that was taking care of our fellow citizens. I want to make sure that I look after you. I want to make sure we look after those people who've served our country and our community. And I don't see us giving money away to countries that are already doing well and are oil transporters, as oil exporters, and so forth and so forth. This is Canada. Let's look after ourselves first while still being responsible for those who need the most help. Thank you.
So this is really interesting. This actually highlights a lot of the problem that we have in our discourse right now. We have a Liberal get up and tell you how wonderful we're doing in terms of international aid. We're actually spending less money on humanitarian aid right now than we did under Stephen Harper. We added money in the federal budget this year that for overseas development assistance that is solely to encourage private corporations to get involved in funding sustainable development goals. We created financial instruments to be the first loss so that corporations can make money off of poor people in other countries. And we're holding back our overseas development assistance to try to convince corporations to get involved in solving poverty overseas. Yeah, I was shocked too. I went to the United Nations in April for the financing for sustainable development goals, and there was an investor fair there at the same time. Indonesia had a table, and they had a list of the P3 projects that investors could invest in to privatize their water systems, to privatize their schools, and that's where our government wants our overseas development aid to go, and they want us to talk about how fantastic they are, which lets the Conservatives tell you we're spending too much money overseas and we need to concentrate on it back home. That's divisive and it's wrong. It's a fact-free debate. So I think we need to do a little bit of research and understand what's actually happening, inform ourselves, and neither of these parties are telling you the truth.
I'm going to piggyback on what Angela said. I honestly believe that our two parties that we keep flipping back and forth to vote for this to get rid of the Conservatives, vote for the Conservatives to get rid of the Liberals. We've tried that so many times, and what we get is governments that just touch the surface on the important issues, right? And a lot of what Anita says, I respect Anita tremendously for her work, but she is just telling you what governments in power are responsible for. These are just a list of things that the Liberal government has done, right? But it is just scratching the surface. They don't dive deep into anything because all they're trying to do is put a little bit of money here so that they can list all this wonderful things that they have done, but they're not doing enough in any particular area. And in overseas projects, as Angela said, they're actually putting less in than the Conservative government used to. I also believe that we do have to look at where we put our money as well. Climate change is going to affect other countries far more than us, and we need to support those countries, and that is where I believe the Green Party and myself, I would like to invest it in those kind of projects that help countries adapt to climate change or even give them opportunities to have some of their population, the most at risk, move into Canada. I am a full supporter of immigration here in our wonderful country.
All right, our next question. Please tell us the first 2 actions you would recommend to improve access to family doctors through federal government policy. And we're going to start with you, Mr. Abdi.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. Healthcare is very, very important for us as a party. And one of the things that we're going to do right off the bat, first of all, is to ensure that every year we're going to increase 3% to the social and health transfer to the provinces. We want to make sure that we encourage more doctors to come to our country and to do business. And in order to do that too, one of the things that happens is there's all kinds of barriers. And some of those barriers can be even sometimes simple as some of the business structures that are already in place, whether it's the taxation system that we have, or even it's just a way even doing foreign trained doctors that can come into our system. And then I think the most important thing that we can do for our community is to make sure that we provide the environment that it takes for us to be able to support our community. One of the things that we're also going to do is we're going to provide $1.5 billion into medical related equipment such as CT scans and MRI machines to make sure that you have access to the medical help that you need, and there's no more such a thing as a hallway healthcare in this country. But I will be there to ensure that we support all the support that we can give to the provincial government. As you know, that is their mandate. Our job is to make sure we give them the funding, and we're saying even if the GDP went up, we are going to match it every year to make sure that we continue doing healthcare funding to the provinces. That's something we can guarantee you as a Conservative Party. Thank you.
So access to doctors was a big issue growing up in rural Saskatchewan, and our doctor actually was from Mauritius, and he had come to Canada. So I think, and we had often doctors in neighboring towns that were from South Africa. So I definitely think helping people who come to this country get their credentials recognized is helpful in terms of increasing the supply of doctors, but we also want to look at student loan relief for people that have gone to school here and are taking places in hard to service areas. Like I had a friend who worked in Cape Breton for a few years because in a small community where they had a hard time getting a doctor. So I think if we can provide some type of relief or a contract with doctors going into university and say, okay, well, we'll pay for your school if you promise to work for 5 years in this community here, and create that type of relationship where we're helping to actually get doctors where they're needed. I did my master's degree on the unmet needs of healthcare, and a huge problem across the country is simply not enough access to medical doctors. And if we can provide clinics where there are nurse practitioners and there are a variety of healthcare professionals where we can provide that continuity of care, that I think that's really important for people as well. To have that community clinic service is one of the best ways to provide comprehensive and really reliable healthcare for communities.
Access to healthcare is a structural problem. Angela pointed out that I have personally had an Uber driver who is a doctor and had to essentially redo his entire certificate. I think we need to fast track that system. That would definitely make a huge impact in providing more doctors in our system. The other piece of the puzzle is looking at our healthcare system in a big picture sense. We have nurses who are essentially frontline workers that are quite capable of delivering prescription drugs and giving access to emergency care services, and we need to enable this. We need to actually change the system so that nurses have more power in the system, and they're not going to be doing surgeries, but they can certainly prevent hallway medicine from happening in our hospitals. The last piece that I think is really important is funding the education of new doctors. We really need to focus on this. We need to expand our medical school systems. We need to have encourage more students, more women to get into the medical field, and we have to basically fund that from a federal point of view so that we can increase doctors across our country. And the last piece of that puzzle is location, geography. We do have to make restrictions, and enabling that through special funding or paying doctors more, that I know we do that a little bit, but make it significant so doctors actually want to reside in these small communities. And I think those are all little pieces of the puzzle, but they will go a long way to helping solve that problem.
Thank you. So while the delivery of healthcare is a provincial issue, what the federal government can do is set national standards, be a convening power to share best practices, but also to give targeted money to the provinces. Traditionally, and we have actually committed over 10 years, a 3% increase in the health transfer to the provinces. But in addition to that, in our platform, we are committing $6 billion specifically for access to family doctors, but more than that, to access primary care teams that are going to be able to get people access to family doctors, but also to the mental health supports that they need before they end up in a hospital emergency room. We're also committed to making sure that we continue to implement universal pharmacare. But what this does in the long run is it saves money. It's the same thing that we did in the last two budgets, where we brought $11 billion extra to the provinces for home care and mental health. Because we know that if we invest in these areas, we save money in the long term. If you invest in the mental health of a young person the first time that they have a mental health crisis, the return on investment, never mind the humanity of that person, the return on investment of that young person over their lifetime is 17 to 1. If you invest in making sure that people have access to primary care teams so that they don't end up in the emergency room in a hospital bed that costs $1,600 a night, you can put a lot of that money into things like home care, mental health, family doctors, and make sure that everybody is able to get the help when they need it and not when they reach a crisis. Thank you.
All right, our next question, I believe, is it, I think, Angela, you're answering this one first, right? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not paying attention. Does your party support the creation of new parkland? If so, will activities such as mining or logging be allowed on these lands? Does your party support the creation of parkland? By that, I'm going to assume, green space, reserved lands. If so, will activities such as mining and logging be allowed on these lands?
So yes, we support that. We've promised to protect at least 30% of our natural spaces. Biodiversity is a really important issue, and we're losing species rapidly. I was really glad to hear about Anita talking about the initiative with the wetlands, because wetlands are part of that. But there's a huge amount that we can do in terms of protecting our wilderness in Canada, and we are lucky to have so much of it. So no, we would protect it, and you would not be allowed to do mining or logging on that protected land, because that just that disturbs the whole point, right? A lot of the problem that we had up north with losing caribou was because mining companies they'd clear cut these long lines through the trees, and so the wolves could just kind of peek down the line and be like, oh, there's a bunch of caribou down there, and run, and then the caribou had nowhere to hide. So you're not really protecting a space unless you're protecting it from that type of activity as well.
Our parks, I believe, are our national treasure. And the Green Party is, I think just by the nature of our name, is committed to expanding our park system tremendously. What's important, though, is to realize that parks, we need to protect them more so that governments that come into power in the future cannot break those laws. And I think that is a really important thing that needs to be brought to the table, so that we can't change things at the whim of government. Once it is a park, it is a park for eternity. The other thing we have to do is look at connecting our parks. It is really important from an ecological point of view to make the corridors between parks connected, because parks that sit by themselves, and I can tell you this, we will just look at our own local mud lake. It is a wonderful conservation area. It is an awesome spot. but every once in a while we get a deer in there or even a bear, has happened before, but that bear can't go anywhere and then has to be removed forcibly, sometimes at the expense of the life of the animal. Corridors are what actually is important in terms of parks. We need to connect them together. So the Rocky Mountains need to have a park corridor that goes all the way to Alaska, where we're no longer in charge. We need a corridor from the Adirondacks to Algonquin. We need corridors that go across our boreal forest. And yes, that means we have to protect the core part of that, because that is actually the largest intact forest land left in the world, right? It's going to surpass the Amazon in importance quite soon. So we have to do more.
Thank you. Our government has already protected 17% of our spaces as conservation areas. We've increased that significantly. We've also protected 10% of our marine and ocean spaces and have the very first oceans protection plan in Canadian history. We are going to go beyond that. We are committing that 25% of our land and 25% of our oceans will be protected by 2025. And that means no mining, that means conservation space. But even in the other spaces, we've introduced Bill C-69, which received royal assent, which is putting more regulations and environmental assessments and making sure that things like species at risk are actually enforced. We are making sure that when development projects happen outside of these 25% of protected spaces, that's also making sure we have environmental protections. On top of that, we have committed to planting 2 billion trees. And we know that the tree canopy, and that will include here, the tree canopy is one of the best ways to make sure that you're absorbing the carbon in the air, and it's also one of the best ways to keep our communities healthier and more enjoyable. But I also was able to negotiate when the Wildlife Center came to us and said there's all these 190 species that have returned, but they're not connected to the green belt around the city because they're crossing Moody Drive. And I have managed to get $5 million to do a feasibility study on creating 3 underpasses under Moody Drive, which would connect that corridor so that the animals that we were talking about are able to go under the road, and then you have a connected corridor throughout the entire city. Thank you.
Turn it on. A little bit of a personal experience. I was in Africa last year, specifically Kenya, and while I was in Nairobi, one of the things I quickly realized was there's no green space. I was even asking my friends, I said, where are the kids playing? Where do you guys go for a run? There was nothing. So trust me, I very, very much appreciate green space. So my answer would have also been a copy and paste of what Angela said, which is, you know what, there's a reason why it's protected, right? It defeats the purpose otherwise. So if an area is protected, we have to make sure that it is protected, and we have to make sure that it is free from any other buildings or any other minings or any other activity. And that's where, obviously, I also agree with my friend David in the sense of making sure that when we have these spaces protected, we make sure we put the legislation, the rules in place to ensure they are protected, not temporarily, but they are protected for the foreseeable future. Yes, down the road, you're going to have situations where it's going to be a little bit of a jogging going on between our population and expansion. But I'm telling you, if I learned anything about green spaces, I have 3 kids, and I want to make sure that we protect our green spaces and our parklands, and to make sure they're free from developments, and as well as minings or any other activities. So I am 100% down for that. Thank you.
Okay, and this question David will be starting with. The question is, will your party seek to balance the books within 4 years? Now, there's some more notes here. I'll just kind of highlight what I think is the most relevant here is that interest payments on the debt is currently our largest federal expenditure in the budget. So it's what we're spending the most money on. So again, will your party seek to balance the books within 4 years?
That is a great question, and I think when people think about the Green Party, that is one of their greatest worries. Balancing a budget, and I can tell you this as a business, is a difficult process, but you have to do it. I honestly, at the core of my personal belief system, is that we need to always understand the finances of our country. And the way to do that is you have to shift where your priorities are with spending money, and you also have to increase revenue. And the Green Party has actually produced a fully costed platform that has received a passing grade. It is very ambitious. But the key thing that I want to point out to people is, who here has heard of Silicon Valley, right? I'm sure everybody here knows that. They have spurred the growth of the entire United States and turned California into one of the most, powerful economies in the world. We have that opportunity here, and that's where the Green Party wants to take us. Green technology is the future of our economy. A country like Germany has already realized this, and their economy is booming. We need to actually follow them. We're not even in the lead anymore, but other governments are refusing to acknowledge that that is where we need to be investing our money, because it will drive our economy forward, and that is where we're going to get the revenues, that is where we're going to get the taxes, and that is where our priority is. Thank you.
So there are two ways that you can balance the budget. If you think about your home, you can either cut, so that might mean not fixing the leaky roof and letting it continue to leak, or not paying the heating bill or selling the furniture, or you can increase your income. Our government has been focused on increasing our income. And as in your home, sometimes you need to borrow to do that. You borrow to go back to school, you borrow to start a business, but in the long run, the income is increasing faster than the spending. And that is our commitment to you. If you look at our costed plan, we will continue to increase our income faster than our spending is increasing. What that means is that the proportion of the national debt compared to our income is going down every single year. And in fact, that's the debt to GDP ratio. Ours is the lowest in the G7. It is declining, and it's the lowest it's been in Canada in the last 55 years. We have in Canada a growth policy that is actually increasing our growth to the point where the International Monetary Fund said that Canada's policies should go viral. We have a AAA credit rating, and it's because we are investing in the things that are creating jobs. It's getting people working. It's putting money into innovation and things that are going to actually increase our growth, including getting more women in the labor force and making sure that we have women entrepreneurs, and more than 16% of companies are actually owned by women. So by doing that, we're able to increase our GDP, and that way we will continue. And I'll be the first one to tell you, if that ever reverses, yes, we have to tighten our belt, but we can't do it with an arbitrary deadline that is going to force us to do cuts.
When it comes to this issue, the Liberals have no credibility. They said they're going to balance the budget. 2015, they said they will be balancing the budget in 2019. It is 2019. My dear fellow members here, the budget has not balanced itself. It's almost nearly $700 billion, with $2.2 billion per month on interest alone. The fact of the matter is, we cannot continue the way we are. And one of the things that you're going to hear from the Liberal Party is that they have this unlimited credit card. They're talking about your home budget, but they have an unlimited credit card where they're going to swipe everywhere they go. Why? Because it's not theirs. It's your credit card. So under Andrew Scheer and the Conservative Party, we are making it a promise that within 5 years the budget is going to be balanced by our party. This is something we've done in the past. 2015, when Stephen Harper left power, he left them with almost nearly $1.9 billion in surplus. He said, here you go, you take it from there. And guess what happened? They will be adding nearly $100 billion to the debt when we are done. They will make promises. They cannot keep it. It's time for a change.
So how many people in this room have $20 million in the bank? Yeah, okay. So the government is not a business. The government is not a household. So some of these analogies only go so far. The government lives forever. I teach union members, actually, political economy, and I need about 20 minutes to answer this question at least. But the short version is that as long as you're making it's similar to what Anita said, but it's a little different. As long as you're making investments that have a higher return than the cost of borrowing, you should make that investment, right? So if building long-term care facilities is going to have a higher return than the cost of borrowing the money that you need to do it, you should build those healthcare facilities. As long as you do that, then you're in good shape, and then your debt to GDP ratio will go down over time. It doesn't matter so much how big the debt is. It matters whether or not you can get more debt from the market. Can you float more bonds? Is somebody out there willing to take your debt? Canadian government debt is the best in the world, and we're actually spending less at the federal government level than we have in 55 years, and we've downloaded those costs to the provinces, and their debt to GDP levels are not as enviable as the federal government. So the federal government needs to step up and take back some of that tax room, those tax cuts that we gave to the wealthy, and use that to reinvest in providing national leadership on healthcare, on housing, and on climate action.
Okay. We're going to come back to the environment. The earlier question was about accommodating the effects of climate change. This one, I'm going to say, is more about stopping or limiting climate change. What will you do to address the climate crisis? And we're going to, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. We have put a plan in place that includes a price on pollution, where we're returning all of the money that we get from that back to Canadians. We have also put a plan where we are not only going to meet the targets for 2030, we are going to exceed them. And we have committed to reaching net zero by 2050. We'll do so by legislating 5-year milestones where it's accountable to Parliament, so any future government has to report on the progress toward the net zero. And we are 3/4 of the way toward the goals that we set out in 2030. We're also taking a leadership role internationally by making sure developing countries don't go the same route that we did and invest in the green technologies there in the first place. We have also announced that we will be cutting the taxes on any green technology company by 50%, because right now we know that we can get into a $1 trillion economy when it comes to green technology. Other countries like Denmark are already ahead of us. Our government in the last 4 years has done more than any other jurisdiction on reducing our fossil fuel emissions. And that's been done through a low carbon economy fund that businesses and institutions can use to convert their fossil fuels to green energy. That's been done through $20 billion in transit infrastructure, in providing funding for research in green technology, and through our price on pollution, clean fuel standards that are going to reduce 7 million car equivalents per year, and we're going to be phasing out coal by 2030. This is more than any government has done in 4 years. There are some governments who have been doing it for a long time, but we cannot go backwards. We have to keep on going forward, and we have to keep doing more.
Thank you very much for that question. First of all, we will get rid of the carbon tax. We will ensure that we introduce the green home renovation tax credit, which is going to be $3,800. And the reason why is because if you want to put solar panels, if you want to change your furnace, if you want to change your windows, it's a practical solution for you as Canadians to change the way we behave in terms of the environment. We're also going to introduce a 15% tax credit for transit. So anybody who wants to take the bus, we will make sure, or you want to take the LRT, we will make sure that you get that back. Further, we're also going to make sure that we focus not on taxation, but for innovation and technology. That is where our community is. And also, we're going to go after the big polluters, not after the commuters. Now, let me tell you this. When it comes to this file, the Liberals are hypocrites. Simple. As we speak right now, Justin Trudeau's got 2 planes in the air, one for his cargo and one for his ego. That needs to stop. The second thing I want to say here is that we as a community can do better. We will work with our community, we will work with our businesses, and we will make sure we support them to ensure whatever it's going to take to make our community, our environment a better place, we will do that. And one more last thing before I forget. Folks, don't believe the hype. They put labels on us in terms of conservatives. Oh, they are deniers. No, I'm here. I'm a believer. So don't believe the hype. Thank you.
So I don't know how many of you watched the leaders debate on Monday night, but I think the best line from the debate, and I'm not biased at all, was you don't have to choose between Mr. Delay and Mr. Deny. So I apologize, you're not Mr. Deny. But you don't. The truth is that the Liberals' targets are the same as Harper's targets and are not going to get us to the science-based targets that we established in Paris that need to get to 1.5 degrees. So we're not keeping up our international commitments, and we could. There are very simple things that we could do. We could transition our public transit system to electric buses. We could actually, Canada Post has been asking for this for years, that they transition to electric vehicles. And for whatever reason, the government has decided that that doesn't make sense. That's one of the first things that we would do as government. We would transition all government vehicles over to electric vehicles. We would work with municipalities to transition their vehicles over to electric vehicles. We would retrofit all public buildings and work with provinces and municipalities to help them retrofit their buildings. And for individuals, instead of tax credits, see, tax credits don't work. They don't work for people. What we would do is the utility would actually provide you a loan up front to replace your furnace or your doors or your windows, and you would pay it back over time on your bill. It's called pay as you save. It works in Manitoba. It can work in the rest of Canada.
If anybody listens to CBC or Maclean's magazine, you know that the facts that have just been accredited to the Liberals' climate change program is actually false. That many of their promises were overinflated numbers, and they're just not going to work. The other part that really disturbs me is that most of their plan is going to come online sometime before 2030 or 2050. So they're looking at a future where they are not accountable to any or most of their programs. The Green Party, we all know, has been focused on climate for a long time. In fact, we've known about climate change for over 60, 70 years, and the fact that the Green Party has been working on this file for about 20 years goes to show you that we actually do care enough, and Elizabeth May is one of those women that has the backbone to follow her beliefs. She will make the changes that are necessary to stop climate change happening in Canada. We also have to lead, right? We also have to show other countries that if we can do it, they should follow us. It's not a win-lose game, right? We can't say, oh, China's not going to do it. I'm going to tell you a couple of facts. China and India are actually making more impact right now in their own countries than we are as Canadians, and that is an embarrassment, right? They are making changes, right, that we are actually not doing. We are delaying, right? And, you know, my personal opinion is that we have to do this in the next 4 years.
Okay, moving to Indigenous issues, and we'll be starting with you, Mr. Abdi. What will you personally do to enact the final recommendations of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Inquiry?
Thank you very much. And this issue is absolutely very important for our community and for especially people from the Indigenous community. I'll tell you, folks, when it comes to the issue of missing and murdered Aboriginal females, women, I do understand some of the families that have not had closures for a long time. That file cannot be a political file. That file needs to be something where we treat it with care, compassion, and make sure that we think about the causes of some of this stuff. Why is it happening? What has caused it? Look, my background is in policing, and what I have done over the last 16 years is to ensure safety and security for people in our community. When I hear some of these women we're talking about in these communities that have been missing and murdered over all these years, sometimes I'm surprised how come it's taken this long to be able to ensure that we find the root causes, to ensure that we investigate what led to this, to ensure that there are programs in place for these the communities that these people are coming from. And if you elect me as a member of parliament in your community, I will make sure that I become a champion for that community to ensure from a national perspective that those families that have been impacted most have a closure and compassion and a way moving forward. Listen, this thing has been going on for a while. I think we can be the adults in the room and bring an end and bring it to a closure for these families. We just cannot continue talking about this file for this long. I think it's time that we make a strong stand on this issue. Thank you.
This is a national embarrassment, and it's a national shame. And I think if people here follow Cindy Blackstock, if you don't, you should. She's a wonderful leader, and she talks about how to make sure that another generation of Canadians doesn't have to apologize. So what we need to do is just set it as a priority, that it is unequivocally absolutely something that we are committed to doing, that we are committed to prioritizing, and that we recognize the root causes of what's happening. It's racism, it's poverty, it's access to safe housing, and it's access to dignity in how people are treated by the police. So there are a number of different elements from the inquiry that we need to act on. But we need to make the commitment, we need to do it, we need to follow through, and we need to put the money behind it, because that's what hasn't been there to this point. The Liberal government has been promising for the past 2 years an urban Indigenous housing strategy that they still haven't put any money behind. If we had an urban Indigenous housing strategy, there are women that would not have gone missing because they would have had somewhere safe and affordable to live. We have to make sure that another generation of Canadians doesn't have to apologize to another generation of First Nations people. We have to take action now.
The Indigenous file is one of those files that I feel embarrassed to be a Canadian and not have seen anything over my entire lifespan done seriously about it. And the first thing that we have to recognize is we have to be creative, and we have to understand that I am not the solution. None of us are the solution. Most of you, I don't know people, but if you are Indigenous, you are the solution. And how are you the solution? We need to put Indigenous people in charge of solving their crimes, in solving their issues. We need to fund Indigenous culture. We need to fund Indigenous communities. And that is a problem. We keep saying we're going to study it some more. Every government, including the Liberals, keeps studying the problem. They defer solving the water crisis. They defer solving the housing crisis because they know it'll just pass, and then it'll be someone else's responsibility. I think we need to create a national strategy for Indigenous people to take control of the funds to solve their issue. And they will know best how to address the issues in their community. And they will care about solving that. And that is the true problem, is when we put people like us in charge of those files, do we actually truly care in solving the problems when we have our own backyard to take care of? No, we have to let people take care of their own backyards. Thank you.
One of the first things that our government did was to initiate the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry. We have accepted all of the recommendations. We're putting $50 million into victim services. We're also putting money into commemoration, and we are reviewing the police practices that led to this and the underlying root causes. We opened a conversation in this country that has opened up 150 years and more of betrayal, of trauma, of hurt that has started with colonization. And we're hearing a lot of that hurt. We have to keep on having that conversation. And the trust is something that's going to come from actually acting on it. We have already lifted 87 boil water advisories on reserves. There's 50 of them left. They will all be raised by be eliminated by 2021. We've created almost 17,000 new housing units, 13 schools, 500 wastewater projects. We are putting what we need into the infrastructure, but the relationship is something, the reconciliation is something we still have to work on. And one of the most important things for me is not putting more money into the agencies that are apprehending children, but stopping those children from being apprehended in the first place. And I worked for 2 years to make sure that we passed the first legislation federally to make sure that there's child welfare and that children are not going to be apprehended in Ottawa while the mother goes back to Nunavut, but they stay in their communities, they stay in their families, That is a piece of legislation that passed just this last June. It's something I worked hard on because this was happening right here, the Larga Baffin in Ottawa-West Nepean, and I worked on making sure that that never, ever happens again.
Okay, that actually brings us to the end of our audience questions. We're now on to the statement and response section. So each of the candidates has a opportunity. Unfortunately, we just don't have time to bring up all the issues. So this is the opportunity for the candidates to bring up an issue that they think is important, that they think they need to talk about, and then they'll have 1 minute to make their statement. Potentially asking a question of the other candidates if they choose. Each of the other candidates will have 30 seconds to respond to that. And we're going to start with Mr. Abdi, and then that was the draw, yeah. That was the draw, yeah. Just so you guys know, the timer you'll get for your statement, you'll get a 15-second warning with the yellow, and you have a minute, yeah, but the yellow will come on when there's 15 seconds left. For the responses, the yellow will come on when there's around 10 seconds left.
Thank you very much for my statement. My statement this evening is on Alberta. I believe our brothers and sisters in Alberta have been given a bad deal. Alberta is on its knees. Reason, because like I believe in Canada, we have a gift and we have a curse. Our gift is Alberta oil, which is sitting dormant. The curse has been the Liberal government who's completely punished them. And this is the reason why. We have our own brothers and sisters in Alberta who literally have closed shops. We have the most ethical oil. We have the most clean oil. We're importing oil from organizations that support extremism and terrorism-related activities. Yet at the same time, we're punishing our brothers and sisters in Alberta. So my statement is this. I want to make sure that we assist our brothers and sisters in Alberta to make sure that there's a floor of energy in our country, to make sure we get the revenue that we need, to make sure that we move our communities forward. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you. So I encourage you all to Google me and Michelle Rempel. We had a little bit of a discussion about this a couple weeks ago, and there's a clip on Twitter. I'm from a rural community in Saskatchewan. My entire family is still there. I have brothers and uncles and cousins that work in the oil sands. But I know that the price of oil has dropped to $50 a barrel, and it just simply doesn't make sense economically to expand that pipeline. Forget about the First Nations communities that are saying it's not going to happen. What we need to do is invest in new green jobs for those workers and build a new economy, a new prosperous economy that we can all share in.
I'm from Alberta, actually. I was born there. Didn't spend many years there, but I want to address something is that Alberta lost 200,000 jobs with the recession after the oil industry crashed. And that is significant. And yet when Oshawa lost maybe 1,000 jobs, the Liberal government threw money over there. All the attention was focused. And we do ignore Alberta, and I want to acknowledge that. I agree. The solution is not oil, because it's going to be like horses drawing buggies before the cars came around. We have to invest in the green economy. And Alberta actually has geothermal potential equal to Iceland. And Iceland runs their entire...
Sorry, 30 seconds.
So it looks like we have a lot of Westerners here. I was also born and raised in Calgary. But what I know is that it's in Alberta where some of the best technology and innovation on clean energy is actually happening. We cannot get prosperity if we are leaving behind Indigenous people, if we are not doing the proper environmental assessments. That's the reason that we were not able to get any pipelines to Tidewater. We have to make sure that we are taking the best in the green technology in Alberta and elsewhere and making sure that it's not about how you get it to market. It's about reducing the demand and making sure we convert to green technology.
And we're going to come right back to you for your statement.
Yes, thank you very much. One of the things that hasn't come up, actually, and I'm surprised by that, is the public service. And when I was here in 2011, and I was debating John Baird on this, he said, we'll be able to balance the budget, and we will not cut one single public service job. And then the Conservative government, over 4 years, cut 35,000 jobs from the public service, 7,000 of them right here in Ottawa. Many of your families probably also suffered. We have brought back 15,000 public service jobs in the National Capital Region in the last 4 years. For those parties that are looking at arbitrary deadlines on how they're going to balance the budget, I would like to know if there's a commitment today to making sure that there is not one single job cut from the public service, because those are the jobs that families in our riding rely on. They're the jobs that Canadians rely on in order to get the services that they need. And we have increased the jobs in the professional public service, not the outsourcing, the actual public service. And I'd like to know where the other candidates stand on this.
I believe it was supposed to be a statement, but I will take that as a question. The fact of the matter is, I will not stand for anybody losing their job. And I will tell you this simply because I believe that people have to take care of the young ones that are sitting here before us. I have 3 kids. I do not want to be in a position where I see people losing their jobs. But one of the things that I can tell you is we will make sure that we do some of the corporate spendings that the Liberals have been doing in order to make sure that we save more money in our pocket.
So you'd think if this government cared about public servants so much, they'd make sure they got paid properly and on time, eh? Yeah, so all they needed to do was hire back some compensation advisors and put them in the departments. Those women, mostly women, had very difficult jobs, and when they were designing the Phoenix system, they didn't believe them about how difficult those jobs were and how many decisions they made. The unions warned the Liberals how disastrous it would be, and they told them afterwards what they needed to do to fix it, and they still haven't listened.
The Green Party absolutely would not be cutting federal public sector jobs. That is something that is a fundamental part of our platform. I have to build on that Phoenix pay system debacle. The piece of the puzzle that some people don't understand is that it's a closed source program. Only IBM, because they have strong Liberal ties, is allowed to work on that program. It should be open source. We have the strongest high-tech community in the country, yet none of our local companies are even allowed to look at that program. Instead, we outsource it to the US.
And our next would be from Ms. McEwen.
Thank you. So I want to go back to how we're going to pay for it, because that's the question that a lot of people have for me at the door is, this sounds fantastic, but are you sure it's possible, and how are you going to pay for it? So I outlined a little bit earlier how we're going to pay for it. And I want to just put it in context because, so the capital gains tax, this is, we're going to change the inclusion rate from 50% to 75%. And it used to be 75%. Actually, even in this century, Paul Martin was closing some other loopholes and thought he'd give a quiet, tax break to his friends over on the side and change the capital gains inclusion rate from 75% down to 66 and then down to 50. That would generate about $8 billion in revenue. That's a lot of money. That's almost a whole pharmacare system. We're also going to tax people that have more than $20 million in wealth. We're going to take corporate income taxes for big businesses that are really profitable from 15% and move that up to 18%. Again, it was there when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. So we're proposing huge amounts of money, but it's actually shocking when you think that's what other governments have cut just in the past 15 years.
I agree with everything Angela just said. She's an economist, and we cannot argue the facts that we have to create more revenue in our system. And, the NDP platform and the Green Party platform are very similar in this manner. The one thing I do want to always point out, though, is that the Green Party seems to have introduced their platforms ahead of everybody else. And then I've noticed that the Liberals, the NDP, all seem to be copying Elizabeth May's ideas.
So we have actually already done it. The first thing that we did was we raised taxes on the wealthiest 1%. So that was raising it from 29% to 33% for anyone making over $200,000 a year. We lowered it on the middle income bracket, which is $45,000 to $90,000. And now we're going further. We are actually going to exempt the first $15,000 of income from any taxes, which is going to lift 700,000 Canadians from having to pay any federal income tax whatsoever. And these are the people who are the poorest. These are the people who need it most.
You can't grow on tax cuts.
So our universal tax cut is very simple. It is to help all Canadians to lower their income tax. But the people who are going to benefit the most are going to be people who are on the lowest bracket. In fact, the taxes are going to go from 15% to 13.75%. And that's because not only do we care, but we are compassionate. That's one of the things that we can tell you here. In terms of the tax system, we cannot tax our way out. We have to be able to understand the people who create jobs in this community are people who are working hard, such as small businesses, that we need to lower their taxes. Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Stibbe.
Surprised this one hasn't come up yet, but I want to talk about seniors, especially in this group here. The Green Party has a comprehensive platform for our social safety net. And I think that is one of the critical pieces that we can promise that we will focus on, whether we are in power or in a position to influence other governments. One of the core beliefs is to create this guaranteed livable income. And I think that is really important because when we think of all these lovely cuts and programs that people offer, the part of the puzzle that most people don't understand is that we have to apply for these programs, and it's difficult to apply. Anybody here ever apply for EI? It's a long, cumbersome process, even for an educated individual. Imagine the bottom rung of our ladder trying to go through those processes. A simple one-step program would solve that issue and would provide dignity to those people at the bottom of the ladder and would certainly help our seniors. And then you add onto that pharmacare, housing program, national dementia strategy, and everything else that we have.
So the first thing we did was we reduced the age of retirement for OAS back from 67 back to 65, increased the guaranteed income supplement for single seniors by 10%, and negotiated with the provinces to make sure the Canada Pension Plan maximums that you can get go from $13,000 a year to $21,000 a year. We're going further in this platform. We're increasing the CPP survivor's benefit by $25,000, which is more than $2,000 a year. And for those seniors over 75, we're increasing the OAS by 10% because we know that that's when you need the income the most. Thank you.
Thank you. For seniors, first of all, if you're in this room, thank you, because it is because of you I'm standing here before you, for all the work you've done to make our country a beautiful place. Second thing is I want to make sure that we are going to ensure that all foods and medical essentials for you will never be taxed. That's one thing we can also tell you. And we're going to also make sure that any of your respite care is not going to be, you can write it off so that there's no issue right there. So for seniors, also safety and security is very, very important. And I'm going to make sure that I work with local police agencies to make sure that we put your safety first. Thank you.
Good one. The NDP has committed to a national seniors strategy that would include looking at the current income supports and increasing them, because if you live on GIS, you know that that increase was not enough to cover the increase in the cost of living. Wages and pensions are not keeping pace with the cost of housing and the cost of food. We need to do more for seniors. We're committed to a rental supplement for seniors that are paying more than 30% of their income on their rent. We're committed to introducing pharmacare, universal pharmacare, to help you pay for your medicine, dental care for households with less than $70,000, and we want
So thanks, everyone. So we're actually running a little bit late. Our next segment is 3 minutes of concluding remarks from each of the candidates. So hopefully they will not continue to run into the timeout period, as we've been consistently doing here. So we'll probably run just a few minutes past 9, if that's okay with everyone. And we're going to go in reverse order from how we started. So we're going to start at the far end with Mr. Sibby.
I've heard a lot of promises and a lot of programs that Anita has listed off as successes of the Liberal government, and they're impressive. But I want you to imagine if the Green Party was that party in power, how much more impressive those facts and figures would be. Because it is easy to spew that kind of information when you are actually the party in power, because that is your responsibility. And I honestly believe that we need to create a minority government. And this riding is a unique riding. We have voted almost, very close, an NDP government in power here. We have voted Liberal. We have voted Progressive Conservative. I honestly believe this is the time to vote for the Green Party. My personal philosophy is that your representatives need to focus on the issues that matter to our local residents. I don't believe, the big picture puzzle pieces that we talked about here, the really big programs, those actually are taken care of at a national level, right? Elizabeth May is leading the way, and you can trust her to actually behave with integrity and follow through on her commitments. And it's really important that we put someone like her in a position where she can actually enact those changes that she has been talking about for years. My personal commitment will be here at the local level. I really feel that we need to work with residents in all the neighborhoods to solve all the issues that happen. I know that politicians love glad handling and showing up for coffee talks and talk, but I really think that the important things happen behind the scenes, and I can tell you that's where I will commit to. I am involved at different levels. I've started a business here because I knew that was how to get kids on the river. I am working with Teresa Kavanagh, who is our wonderful city councilor here, to bring Britannia Winter Trail project here. I'm involved in my community. As a teacher, I hear stories from my students all the time, and I work with kids, and I understand what families are concerned about. I believe that is what I need to do. I need to work, and I believe in working with whatever party is in power, because I don't believe in partisan politics. I think, if the Conservatives are in power at the provincial level, we can work together. I honestly think one of the biggest projects that we need to have for our community here is we need our own sportsplex, senior center complex right here, because if we're talking about Ritchie Street being an issue, it's because they have nothing to do. They don't have a place to go, and those are the kind of projects I want to see happen right here in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. So people in Ottawa-West Nepean, when I'm knocking on their doors, they're frustrated. They're frustrated that the change they voted for in 2015 didn't happen. They're frustrated that promises like door-to-door mail weren't kept, that proportional representation wasn't kept, that I've had people yell off the couch at me, they bought a pipeline. So people are frustrated, and they want more. People are hungry for community, and they're hungry for that connection. And I think things like a recreational center in this community, things like the community associations that you have that are vibrant and provide engagement in the community are such an important part of a democracy and of keeping us together and building the supports that we need. I think that you want a government that's on your side and that you know is in it for you. That's the NDP. The Liberals are doing their darndest to frame this election as a choice between better and worse. But we just went through that election provincially in Ontario, and we know what happened. We got Doug Ford. And the Liberals are going to try to scare you into voting Liberal because we got Doug Ford. But guess what we could have had? We could have had an NDP government in Ontario. We could have had a government that was investing in education and investing in healthcare and building public transit that works, not P3s. We could have had that, but we didn't because too many people were afraid and voted Liberal instead of choosing hope and voting for the NDP. I encourage all of you to take a look at the message that Jagmeet Singh and I am giving forward in this election, the positive vision for concrete change to make the status quo that works for all of us instead of works for well-connected liberal insiders and big corporations. We can do better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to thank the organizers for putting this event together. Thank you very much. I know it takes a lot of work. Thank you for the community members who took the time to be here this evening. I very much appreciate you joining us, including the young folks who are still here. First of all, I just want to start off a little bit by saying this election for me, it is personal. I have been in this community for over 20 plus years, working at the Boys and Girls Club and as a law enforcement officer protecting our streets, the same streets. I'm very familiar with this community. I'm very familiar with this territory. So when I say personal, I mean some of the stuff that has been happening. For example, something we didn't talk a little bit about here is some of the safety and security aspects of it. We've had shootings in this community. Last year alone, we've had over 86 shootings in this city. For the last 4 years, we've been averaging 20 homicides per year. These kids are some of the kids that I have known in the past through the Boys and Girls Club or other community events. Some of the parents that have been affected, I know them. I have been to burials, I've been to funerals. I know how this is. I do understand it. So I want to make sure that no kids are getting impacted by violence, and that's why we want to make sure through our government, through our Andrew Scheer's leadership, we bring a gang prevention program where, again, we help parents to make sure that they have the support they need and also make sure that young people do never become victims to gun violence. When taxes go up, I see the people who are affected. I see the businesses. I know the businesses. I know people who've come to me and told me they're so disgusted by being called tax cheats. When I see seniors and I see Canadians with disabilities, all I think about is the money that we have wasted, money that could have gone to good use. We can do so much better. We can look after our families, our seniors, people who need support in our community. And the way we're going to do that is to be able to have a strong leadership. The Liberal Party 4 years ago promised you many things. We know for sure, sitting in this hall right now, you did not get electoral reform and the budget has not balanced itself. They will do anything they can to get votes. I ran in 2015. I worked very, very, very hard. They won, and the idea was for them to follow through with the promises they made. They failed. Presently, we have void in their leadership. There's issues with ethics. There's issues with accountability. There's issues with leadership. There's issues with transparency. You name it, it's there. And so you need someone who has integrity, who has a proven record in this community and service, and I offer you that. Listen, I cannot promise you the world, because I'll be a liberal. But what I'm going to do is I am going to make sure that I give you tangible ideas that do make sense. October 21st, you're going to make a choice. That choice is going to be really simple. You can either go back to the last 4 years, of which we've seen the results, or you can trust your vote to a proven leader in this community, and that's Abdul Abdi.
Canadians are better off today than they were in 2015. Our economy has created over 1 million new jobs. That's more than the Harper government was able to do in 10 years. Our unemployment rate is the lowest now that it's been in over 40 years. We have done that by making sure that we're leaving no one behind. Through our policies, we have raised 900,000 Canadians out of poverty in 4 years. That includes 300,000 children, including in this neighborhood, who have been lifted out of poverty because of the changes in the Canada Child Benefit. 50,000 seniors were lifted out of poverty because of the increase in the GIS pension. And we are doing this by investing in the things that are saving money in the long run, in mental health, in home care. We have now committed and taken the first steps toward pharmacare. And we've done it right here in our community. We have put $55 billion into a national housing strategy that has, for the first time, legislated the right to housing in Canadian law. And $13 billion of that is already flowing, and we've seen it here in our riding. There is, off of Merivale Drive, a new seniors housing, 42 affordable units right above the Carlington Community Health Center. It's a new model for seniors housing that we're going to be using as a model for the entire country. There's new housing at Michelle Heights. If you see the new homes there, that's also housing that was provided through our government. And we were able to build a new accessible women's shelter in Nelson House. These are the kinds of investments that we've made, and we are also making sure the next generation has the skills that they need and the jobs that they need by putting over 100,000 youth placements in co-ops and apprenticeships, by doubling the number of student jobs, and making university and college more affordable by increasing student grants for those that are low income. We were able to get $22 million in funding for the new DARE district at Algonquin College. It's something that I fought very hard for, and that has turned the old library, which is just stacks of books, into an innovation and entrepreneurship center that is allowing young people to build the networks and get the skills that they need for the new economy. And we are doing this by making sure that the economy and the environment go together. We have a moral obligation to leave a planet to our children that is livable. Climate change is real. We have a plan that is already in place that is going to exceed our targets, and we are going to achieve net zero by 2050. And the other commitment, the one promise that I made to you last time, was that I would be present, I would be here, I would be listening to you, to your priorities, and taking those to Parliament. I have done that. Every single week I have drop-in hours where many of you have come to bring your concerns. I have hosted a coffee meeting every single week because I don't want you to have to go through a staffer or make an appointment to be able to get to me. Many people who make an appointment with an MP, it's because they have problems. I want to hear your solutions. I'm going to keep hearing your solutions and bringing those to Parliament if you re-elect me. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the festivities for this evening. I want to thank each of the four candidates up here. I thought you guys all made your points very well, and I've learned a lot this evening. A couple of other thank yous I want to make. I want to thank Tito at the back there, our sound person. He's with Consensus Multimedia, and Tito has provided his services to us tonight at a considerable discount from his usual rates. However, we still need to pay him. So there's a basket at the back, and there's a basket at the front if you guys still want to make some contributions. Now, you guys have heard all kinds of great stuff here tonight. You're going to go out and vote on the 21st, I'm sure. But I'd like to give you one more thing to do. Go out and find one person who has never voted before and get them to vote in this election. That's just one person. Did you know that this is the first election where millennials of voting age will actually outrank baby boomers? So millennials no longer can be saying they cannot make a change. They can. Advanced polling starts tomorrow, October 11th, through to the 14th, and you can register until October 15th, or you can just vote at the polling station. So get one person to vote, just one. All right, thanks everybody.